Okay, I trust everyone is doing well and praying for you guys to have a good, strong end of the semester. Make sure you get in touch with me if you need additional help. There's something called the After School Assistance Program, and that is number 4 on the list here. And it isn't a program that has been around for many years. And if you would like to get tutoring, I'm not exactly sure how it works here, distance learning, but this is a resource that is for everyone. You can check it out. But I'm still your go to person. So if you have a question in the class, make sure that you run it by me and I'll do everything I can to help you guys out. I'm staying on top of the grading. I will have everything graded again here by this afternoon. So trying to give you a clear picture of where you stand in Aries. So get those late or missing assignments in and your grade will go up. Don't forget the extra credit that's due May 18th. That's next Monday. And then a few other things on the list here are also kind of reminders. So let's get to a couple of these announcements. Other than the after school assistance program, if you're interested in that, you can check it out. From the other day, you learned that the semester exam is optional in biology class, as most classes except for math, because they use that as their placement test. But make sure you turn that semester exam waiver form in by the 19th. Your exam, if you're going to take it, is like the 26th, something like that. So if you are a plus grade going into the semester exam, then you would want to take it because you might be able to get to the next higher grade. If you are a C plus, then within 3 points of the next higher grade, the semester exam has the ability to move your grade about 3 percentage points. So other than that scenario, there's really no reason to take the final exam. But it is optional and you've got to let your teachers know. So there's a form that you turn in, it's an assignment. The STEM water project that you learned about in the last class, that has a due date of May 18th as well. So just work on that. I don't think it's going to take more than, not even sure it's going to take an hour. So go ahead and take a look at that if you haven't already done so. Pretty interesting how they can tag ocean animals, whales, sharks, alligators, some seals, things like that. And the technology is pretty cool. So you're doing that individually for your STEM project. There's a fun assignment and it's called selfie time. You're going to take a selfie of yourself, obviously, and it's going to be in nature, either outside or maybe inside with a plant or with your dog or cat or something like that. And I'll show that to you right now. All right, so I've got a couple of examples. I did this in Adobe Spark, and so I think it works really great. If you're not used to that app, why don't you give it a try? Otherwise, you could use Notability, but don't make it look like a report. Try to make it graphical like you see here. So there are other things out there that you might be using for Instagram or whatever. So practice that skill, and you're going to do a selfie. So I did two, the top one with my dachshund here, and you want to be specific. Someone turned it in already this morning and they just did, a small tree or a large tree, and it's got sunlight. No, it's supposed to be on a particular animal or plant. So ask your parents what the name of that tree is, maybe in your yard, or what this flower is, and then just do a little research. So my dachshund, for example, they were bred to burrow into holes in the ground. And so they're small, They've got short legs, they've got a lot of skin that's kind of elastic, and it's their adaptation to go after their certain prey. And so that's one example. And then the other one right here, I took a picture of a birch tree in my backyard, tried to get all modern data out here. And so I know this is a birch tree. There's several different species of birch tree. I didn't focus in on that, but I did in general. These branches just hang, they just drip down. You can kind of see it over my shoulder, and they're very loose. They blow in the wind. And that's because this tree here is in the temperate area, which really is more northern than we are here, where it gets snowy and the weight of snow can get very heavy on branches, and then they just drip and the snow falls right off of it. They also have bark that is thick and durable, and other times, if they're not like that, then if there's a lot of moisture, then they can get mold and decay on there. So it really protects the wood. And then their roots are really shallow, and that means that they don't have problems with water in the soil. Here in Southern California, if you look at the hills, are all brown. Trees have deep roots because they have to go down toward the water table. But if a tree has short roots, then they're used to water always being available. So in the temperate area, more north of us, all the way from west coast to east coast, basically, if it's not the desert, there's a lot of rainfall. So they have short roots in order to soak that up. And you see, I also posted the source there. So that's what you're supposed to do. Create a quick selfie, um, and use some sort of graphical program, and then add that information just like you saw. You're going to add some pretty cool info about how that plant or animal is adapted. Describe the adaptations of the plant or animal. Charles Darwin was a naturalist, and so he collected plants and animals on his journey on that ship called the Beagle. And so you're kind of following in his footsteps. So this is a simple lab grade. Boost up your grade here as we get into the last week of school. So we have a few classes left, and we're going to go over notes on the evolution of adaptations of animals, and so we've got one more topic really, and then we're done with this unit on evolution. Although we are going to talk next week on how species are formed or how they evolve. But we are going to have a quiz on Tuesday of next week for you guys. And so we've got a couple of classes between then. So we have class on Thursday. There's an all class schedule on next Monday, and we have Marian Mass on next Monday. So following in modern day tradition, we are going to have that Marian Mass and an all school schedule, so you can be ready for that. All right. Um, Looking over the list, I'll get to any questions if you have them as we go along here. And let's get into our notes. So please click into Darwin Presents his case notes. See if I can get those going. I think I have to do this and there we go. All right. Grab the student notes if you haven't already done so, and there are fill in the blank notes. So on this first text slide, there are a number of words for you to fill in. So Darwin, he was gone for 5 years on the ship, took a lot of notes. His journal is pretty famous. And then it was really just his raw notes that he then worked on when he got back. And he did a good job of kind of getting it together, but he was not ready to publish it because it was a dangerous idea. It went against what people thought about the world, basically, how it worked in nature, the struggle for existence with plants and animals. And so he didn't publish his work for 20 years. It really was amazing that he waited so long. His brother, his wife was encouraging him to get his work together, and he just thought, no, it's just not there yet. I need more evidence. So he tinkered around with plants and animals and tried to get some more evidence. And then this was a radical idea, that he was trying to work on, kind of radical like Lamrek. Remember this guy who proposed that if an animal used a certain trait, like tried to wade in deeper water, its legs would get longer and therefore it kind of changed and adapted to that environment. And then if it had offspring, then the offspring would have that. That wasn't quite the right idea as we went over in our last notes. So Darwin was not trying to rush this because he was trying to get as much evidence as possible before he made it public. But in 1858, he was dragging his feet so much that Wallace, an English naturalist working in Malaysia, published some work in a newspaper. And this got Darwin upset because he felt like he was getting scooped. That's kind of a weird word for someone's going to beat him to publish, and then it's going to look like Darwin is copying Wallace, when in fact Darwin had been working on this for a long time. So Darwin decided to move forward with his own work when Wallace started publishing, and then they also presented work together at scientific meetings. Then Darwin published his famous book on the origin of species. It's a free book that you could also get on Apple Books, and it's got a few pictures in there, but mostly it's text like things were back then. So, moving on, under what conditions does natural selection occur? Well, here's the summary paragraph. Natural selection will occur with both plants and animals when when there are more born than can survive. There's going to be competition, there's going to be a struggle. And the genes that everyone inherits as a plant or animal vary among individuals, just like humans have variation in our genetics. And maybe we're seeing that now with some people having a stronger immunity to diseases and like the COVID virus and things. So when you have variation, then there's a variety in how fit organisms are to survive. And then Darwin came up with this notion of survival of the fittest since there is competition. So natural selection is a situation where there's not enough for all organisms, space, food, shelter, that type of thing. There's going to be competition for all these variables, and those that are most adapted are going to be the ones that are surviving. So do you see the tie-in now with your selfie that you're going to be doing? You need to focus in on why is this plant suited to survive and compete. Now, if we plant them there, that's kind of artificial, but if they were growing up from a seedling and they were able to establish themselves, get rooted, get enough sunlight and water, um, then they're adapted to that area. So it turns out that we can take a plant like that birch tree in my yard, and that's not meant to be in Southern California. It would not be right in most areas because it's not designed to just get water deep down in the ground. It doesn't rain here for months at a time. So there's a struggle for existence. After reading Malthus, Darwin realized that if more individuals can survive, members of a population are going to have to compete for everything: food, space, limited resources, no matter what that would be for that particular species. That's the struggle for existence. So Darwin knew that individuals have that variation in their genetics. If you look at plants and animals, they're not all the same. Some might have different color flower. Um, you've heard the story of like the ugly duckling. They thought that that duck was different than others. That's the variation that you're going to find in a lot of animals. But sometimes that oddball is the one that is going to survive because maybe it's bigger, maybe it has larger wings, different coloration, whatever it is. It might be chosen by the environment when the environment shifts and changes to give that one an adaptation, an advantage. Now, adaptation can involve changes in their body parts or structures, like a tiger's claws or stripes or colors or camouflage, or the way that they can mimic other organisms is called mimicry. Um, Physiological functions, like that means biochemical. Even the way that plants carry out photosynthesis developed over time, and now they can feed themselves instead of absorbing nutrients. Now they can make their own sugars, for example. And now a few other examples here in variation and how variations can be adaptations to outcompete others. Here is a it's called scarlet king snake, and it looks like a poisonous eastern coral snake. And I don't know about you, but if I saw either one of these in nature, when you have red and yellow, especially stripes like this where they stand out, animals typically are going to be camouflage and blend in with their environment. So if they do stand out, that means that they're poisonous and you should avoid them. So the one on the top is this is the poisonous snake, the coral snake, and yeah, to me, I wouldn't be able to tell these apart. So that's mimicry when one is not poisonous, but it's faking it, you know. And then here's another one. This is a scorpion fish. Its coloration is so well camouflaged that it blends into its background. And so that was a genetic mutation that allowed this organism to have a different coloration. But wow, what an adaptation for this one to survive. Now, if the others were eaten, didn't pass on their genes, this is how you have a change in a group of individuals. And this is how populations can change because those that survive, if they're the oddball, now you're going to have the next generation have more oddballs and then they become the normal. Adaptations can also be behaviors. Here is a crane that is got a defensive behavior, going to make itself larger as a lot of animals will do. And even my small little Roxy the Rebel Doxy that you saw, when she encounters another larger dog, the hair on her back will raise up. They're trying to make themselves look larger than they really are. And all animals really have a defensive posture or behavior. It scares off um, the predators going after them. So that is an adaptation as well. So it's this whole notion of survival of the fittest, and there's quite a few words for you to fill in here. So, according to Darwin, differences in these adaptations are going to give them a better chance to survive, and that's called fitness. So, fitness is how well is an organism able to survive and reproduce in its environment? Because if you can't make it to adulthood, and if you can't pass on your genes, well, that is going to be the end of that particular type of genetic combinations. So if that was not the one that was most fit in the environment, then it's going to pass away. Individuals that have these adaptations that are well suited to their environment are going to survive and reproduce, and they have high fitness. If an organism is not going to survive and pass on their genes to the next generation, this is said to have low fitness. So, high fitness, they survive and have offspring. Low fitness, they do not. Now, the difference in these rates, high and low, that's called survival of the fittest. The high fitness are going to survive, the low fitness are not. So, what is the mechanism that nature is going to choose which one survives? And so that is a pretty good phrase right there. Natural selection. Nature selects the adaptations that are the most camouflaged, that are having the most advantage to survival, getting food, the speed of which they can do things. Um, Whatever that adaptation is that nature selects as the important adaptation for animals to live and to reproduce. So, natural selection means the environment and nature selects. Artificial selection, on the other hand, is when, like humans, maybe it's a farmer or an animal breeder, when we as humans influence fitness, that's called artificial selection. So, as I mentioned, populations, from generation to generation, they're going to continue the changes because those that survive and reproduce, that gene pool gets selected and moved on. And unfortunately, we're not able to do a natural selection lab that we typically do, where we mimic butterflies in their camouflage on a colorful background. And you would be the birds, and you would go after the ones that were not well camouflaged. Real quick, you would look at the environment of like a tablecloth, and you would grab that butterfly that you could see the quickest. And that's the way it works in nature. Animals aren't going to like go out and feed and then be exposed to becoming prey from another predator. They want to jump down out of a tree, grab their food, and get out real quick. So that's an example of how nature selects. And then if you didn't get picked off, then you could then have offspring. And so the accumulation from generation is going to be how natural selection works. Now, real quick, we're going to go over an example here of grasshoppers. Um, Malthus showed that too many of a plant or animal are put in nature and not all of them can survive. So a grasshopper each one can lay like 200 eggs at a time, but only a small fraction are going to survive. Some of these eggs are going to be eaten, some of the larvae, some of the small grasshoppers. And so if they're different colors like this, some being green and some being yellow, And if the environment is nice and green and lush because of good rainfall, well, if you were a bird coming down here, you probably would see the yellow on a green background, although it's kind of hard to tell because it's kind of like a dark green on a light green background. But if the greens were to match, you would see the yellow stand out a little bit more. So in this case, green is an adaptation, and the green grasshoppers blend into their environment, and so they're less visible to the predator, as we're going to see in the next picture. So along comes a bird picking off the easy to see yellow grasshoppers because they are less fit. The green grasshoppers have higher fitness because they're better camouflaged. The yellow grasshoppers, lower fitness. Survival of the fittest then for the green grasshoppers. So the green grasshoppers become the more dominant when at the beginning they were the oddballs. They were the ones that, mutated a random mutation in the coloration gene. But if you took that a step farther, if the environment changes and now you have yellow grass because the water conditions made it that way, then you're going to have the yellow grasshoppers with high fitness and more of the green grasshoppers. So things are not static. And natural selection doesn't make organisms better. It just means that they're adapted for that particular environment. Adaptations don't have to be perfect. They're just good enough to allow the organism to have an advantage over others so they're not eaten, so that they can eat better. They can also find shelter, camouflage. They will live to pass on their genes to the next generation. But as I mentioned, it's not a fixed direction. There's no one perfect way of doing this. It's just a process that enables organisms to survive in that local environment at that particular time. A couple other examples here. Um, these are two different types of plants in their way of producing seeds, which are the embryo of the next generation. So flowers are going to be pollinated by insects and birds. So this is how they're going to reproduce with the help of a pollinator. The one on the right, however, does not use a helper for pollination. It uses a mechanism of wind. It could also be other ways of like getting wind blown. It might just get blown by a heavy wind, or have you seen the little helicopter blades? Those are really cool too. So there's other mechanisms for getting your seeds blown into the wind. And if you watch any plant or flower that is going to do wind pollination, they have a technique for doing that. Some of these will throw their pollen into the air before the leaves come out in the springtime. You may have noticed that. Or you might notice in the fall that some other trees are waiting for the leaves to fall off, and then they're not going to blow their pollen into the leaves. So pretty cool. All right. If the local environmental conditions change, some traits that were once adaptive may no longer be useful, and different traits might become adaptive. So that's that green versus yellow grasshopper example that I was giving you. So if environmental conditions change faster than a species can adapt, that species isn't going to survive. All right, we're wrapping it up here. And the question that you see on this slide is, Does Darwin's mechanism for natural selection and how plants and animals evolve suggest anything about how we have extinct species? Well, those species that we now find in the fossil evidence, they were not adaptive to the particular environment, and so they all did not make it. And if you work backwards, you can find out that all animals and all plants, all living things have descended from common ancestors. So this is something called the evolutionary tree, and Darwin first proposed that. So this is called common descent. Natural selection depends on the ability of an organism to reproduce and leave descendants. So we've established that. Every organism that is alive today has been successful and descended from parents who survived and reproduced. Quite obvious, right? Just as well adapted individuals in a species survive and reproduce, well adaptive species survive over time. And Darwin proposed that over a lot of generations, adaptations could cause successful species to slowly change. And that word is evolve into new species. And a lesson coming up in the next couple classes, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth into how species are born. So Darwin proposed that living species are descended from their descendants with some modifications. And so he came up with this idea called descent from modification, descent with modification. Common descent. This aspect of Darwin's theory implies that life has been on Earth for a very long time, and the word that they use is deep time, because back in Darwin's day, they only thought the Earth was a couple of thousand years old, and they had no concept of millions of years. So that's what we mean by deep time. And when you consider the small changes that happen and you add them up over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, then you get a lot of changes. And this makes evolution from common descent, common ancestors, believable and theoretical. Otherwise, if you're thinking, how can a fish be related to a frog? How can humans be related to chimpanzees? Things like that. So when you talk about deep time, though, and how things have changed, this is something that is pretty well established. So Darwin based his explanation for the diversity of life on the idea that species change over time. And his evolutionary tree diagram is right from his book. It's right there on the right-hand side. This sketch by Darwin explained how you may have a common ancestor down at the roots of the tree. And as you go out on the branches, then those are the more closely related, and they evolved sooner than those that are farther away on the tree. So a single tree of life links all living things is also an important concept that Darwin came up with.